There are some children who've been forced to grow up too fast, who carry adult responsibilities on small shoulders, who wish for things no child should have to wish for, because they should already have them. What happened when 11-year-old Sophie Martinez walked onto the Family Feud stage with her exhausted single mother Rosa and 3 younger siblings, ages 8, 6, and 4, all of them wearing clothes that were clean but worn, shoes that had been repaired multiple times, carrying themselves with the careful quietness of children who've learned not to ask for too much, was the moment during Fast Money when Steve Harvey asked Sophie, "If you had one wish, what would you wish for?" And Sophie's answer revealed not just poverty, but a childhood sacrificed, a little girl who'd been her siblings' primary caregiver since age 7, whose wish wasn't for toys or games or anything for herself, but for her mother to not have to work 3 jobs, to be able to come home and rest, to be present for her children instead of being a ghost who left before they woke up and came home after they slept. She stood there so small at that podium, her answer delivered with the matter-of-fact wariness of someone who'd already lived too much life, and when Steve Harvey heard what this 11-year-old wished for, his voice broke completely, unable to finish the question, unable to maintain composure in the face of a child who'd been forced to be an adult and whose deepest wish was just to get her mother back. If you've ever been a child who had to parent younger siblings, if you've ever watched poverty steal childhood from children who deserved better, if you've ever heard a kid wish for something so basic it broke your heart that they even had to wish for it, you need to hear what Sophie said. Before we begin, if you believe that children deserve to be children and that working 3 jobs to barely survive isn't a moral failure but a system failure, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel because we share stories about invisible struggles that deserve to be seen. Sophie Martinez was born in 2013 in Los Angeles, the oldest of 4 children born to Rosa Martinez, a single mother who'd immigrated from El Salvador as a teenager fleeing gang violence and had built a life in America through sheer determination and endless work. Sophie's father had left when she was 2, before her younger siblings were born, and Rosa had raised her 4 children completely alone, working multiple jobs to keep them fed and housed in one of the most expensive cities in America. By 2024, Rosa was working 3 jobs, overnight shift cleaning office buildings from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., a few hours of sleep, then morning shift at a restaurant from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. home for an hour, then evening shift doing laundry at a hospital from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. She worked essentially 24 hours a day with brief breaks for sleep and seeing her children, making barely enough to cover rent on their small 2-bedroom apartment in a rough neighborhood, to buy food, to keep the lights on. There was never money for extras, never money for new clothes or toys or activities, every dollar stretched to its absolute limit just to survive. This schedule meant Rosa was essentially never home when her children were awake. She'd leave before they woke up for school, wouldn't be back until after they were supposed to be asleep. And this is where Sophie's childhood ended. Starting when Sophie was 7 years old, she became the primary caregiver for her 3 younger siblings, Miguel's a 6, Isabella a 4, and baby Carlos Ellis 2. Sophie got her siblings up in the morning, made them breakfasts, usually cereal or toast because that's what they had, got the older ones ready for school, walked them to the bus stop, took Carlos to the neighbor who watched him during the day. After school, Sophie picked up her siblings, brought them home, made dinners, usually rice and beans, sometimes with chicken if there was money, helped with homework, bathed the little ones, put them to bed, cleaned the apartment, did laundry, all the tasks that should have been an adult's responsibility, but fell to Sophie because Rosa simply wasn't there. Sophie was 11 years old and had been doing this for 4 years, had essentially raised her younger siblings, had sacrificed her own childhood to make sure her siblings had whatever version of childhood was possible in their circumstances. She never complained, never told anyone at school what her home life was like, never asked for help because she understood instinctively that asking for help might mean CPS involvement, might mean losing her siblings, might mean destroying the family her mother was killing herself to hold together. Rosa knew Sophie was doing too much, felt devastating guilt about it, but didn't have any other option. She couldn't afford childcare, couldn't reduce her hours and still pay rent, couldn't be two places at once. So Sophie did what needed to be done, and Rosa lived with the guilt of having stolen her oldest daughter's childhood out of sheer necessity. The Martinez family survived month to month, paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from homelessness at any given moment. The kids wore donated clothes, ate reduced-price school lunches, never went on field trips that cost money, never had birthday parties, never asked for things they saw other kids have because they understood without being told that money didn't exist for wants, only for the most basic needs. But despite the poverty, despite the exhaustion, despite everything stacked against them, Rosa's children were kind and well-behaved and doing okay in school, largely because Sophie held everything together, provided the stability and presence that Rosa couldn't provide, even though she desperately wanted to. In July 2024, Sophie's teacher from the previous year, Mrs. Chen, ran into Rosa at the grocery store and mentioned that she'd noticed Sophie seemed very mature and responsible, always talking about taking care of her siblings, and had Rosa ever thought about applying for family activity programs that might give the kids some fun experiences. Mrs. Chen mentioned Family Feud as one option, said they often featured families, that maybe it would be fun for the kids. Rosa, who was so exhausted she could barely think straight, filed the information away and later, in a rare moment of hope, applied for her family to be on Family Feud. She thought maybe, just maybe, if they won some money it could help, could give her kids something they'd never had, could mean she could cut down to 2 jobs instead of 3, could be present for them in ways she currently couldn't. They were selected to tape in September 2024. The family would be Rosa, Sophie, C11T Miskelzi and Rosa's sister Carmen and nephew, filling out the 5-person requirement since Isabella and Carlos were too young. When Rosa told Sophie they'd been selected, Sophie's face showed excitement followed immediately by worry. What would happen with the younger kids while they were gone? Who would take care of them? Rosa assured her the neighbor could watch them for that day, that Sophie could just be a kid for once, could have fun. But Sophie's first instinct, being worry about caretaking responsibilities, showed how completely she'd internalized the role of parent despite being 11 years old. On September 13, 2024, the Martinez family arrived at the Family Feud studio. They looked tired but excited, wearing their best clothes which were still clearly worn and outdated, carrying themselves with the quiet dignity of people who had nothing material but still had pride. Steve Harvey, who'd been doing this long enough to recognize poverty when he saw it, noticed immediately that this was a struggling family, that these kids had that particular kind of wariness that came from adult responsibilities and not enough food and stress that children shouldn't carry. When they walked onto the stage, Steve greeted them warmly, and when he got to Sophie, he knelt down to her level, noting this small, serious-faced girl who stood with the posture of someone much older. "And what's your name, sweetheart?" Sophie's voice was quiet and respectful. "Sophie Martinez. I'm 11 years old." Steve smiled gently. 11 years old! That's a great age. "What grade are you in?" Sophie answered, 6th grade, and Steve noticed she didn't smile or show typical kid excitement, just answered seriously like this was a job interview, not a game show. Steve moved on, greeted the rest of the family, noticed Miguel also seemed more reserved than typical kids, noticed Rosa looked exhausted in a way that went beyond normal tiredness, but he didn't press, just started the game. The Martinez family played well despite their nervousness, got several answers on the board, and ended up winning their match, which meant they'd advance to fast money. Rosa would go first, then Sophie would answer the same 5 questions separately, and they needed to accumulate 200 points to win the 20,000. Rosa went first, answered the 5 questions competently, got 134 points, which meant Sophie needed 66 points to win. Sophie came out for her turn, and Steve explained she needed 66 points. Very doable. He started reading the questions. Name a place people go on vacation. Sophie, beach. Good answer on the board. Name something you might find in a kitchen. Sophie, stove. On the board. Name an animal that lives on a farm. Sophie, cow. On the board. They were doing well, accumulating points. Then Steve read the 4th question, and this was the one that would change everything. If you had one wish, what would you wish for? It was meant to be a simple question, The kind where typical answers would be money, or happiness, or world peace, light responses for a game show. But Sophie, 11-year-old Sophie, who'd been parenting her siblings since age 7, who understood poverty and sacrifice and exhaustion in ways children shouldn't, didn't give a light answer. Her response came immediately, delivered in that same quiet, serious voice. I wish my mom didn't have to work so much. I wish she could be home with us. Steve Harvey stopped completely, the card frozen in his hand, staring at Sophie as the full weight of what she'd just revealed began to dawn on him. But Sophie wasn't finished, didn't understand that her answer was supposed to be brief, kept talking because this wish was something she thought about every single day. My mom works 3 jobs, so we can have food and a place to live. She leaves before we wake up and comes home after we're supposed to be asleep. I haven't had dinner with my mom in 4 years except on Christmas. I take care of my little brothers and sister. I get them ready for school. I make their meals. I help with homework. I put them to bed. And I don't mind doing it. I love them, but I wish my mom could be there to do it. I wish she didn't have to work so hard just so we can survive. I wish she could come home and not be so tired she can barely stand. That's my wish. The silence in the studio was crushing. Steve Harvey's face showed he was struggling to process what this 11-year-old had just revealed. A childhood lost to necessity, a little girl forced into parenthood, a mother working herself to death and still barely making it, a family held together by a child who should have been worried about homework and friends, not about feeding her siblings and paying bills. When Steve tried to speak, his voice broke completely, came out as barely a whisper. Sophie, baby, you've been taking care of your little brothers and sister since you were 7 years old. You're 11 and you're the one making sure they eat and get to school and do their homework. Sophie nodded, not understanding why everyone suddenly looked so sad. Yes, my mom has to work, so I help. It's okay, I'm good at it. Steve's voice was shaking, tears running down his face. Baby, that's not help. You've been being their parent. You're 11 years old and you've been a parent for 4 years. He looked at Rosa, who was crying, her hand over her mouth. Mom, is this true? You work 3 jobs. Rosa nodded, crying. I work overnight cleaning offices, morning shift at a restaurant, evening shift at a hospital laundry. I work all day and all night just to pay rent and buy food. I have no choice. If I don't work, we don't eat. If I don't work, we're homeless. But I know what it's costing my children. I know Sophie has had to grow up too fast. I know she's raising her siblings when I should be raising all of them. But I don't have another option. Steve Harvey had to sit down, right there on the stage, unable to stand under the weight of what he was hearing. When he could speak again, his voice was fierce with emotion that sounded like anger but was really devastation. This is wrong. This is so wrong. A mother working 3 jobs and still barely surviving isn't right. An 11-year-old child raising 3 younger children because her mother has to work 24 hours a day just to keep them alive isn't right. This child's wish, this beautiful baby's wish, isn't for toys or games or anything for herself. It's for her mother to not have to work so hard, to be home, to be present, to be able to parent her own children instead of being too exhausted to stand. He turned to the audience, his voice breaking repeatedly. Do you all understand what we just heard? Sophie Martinez is 11 years old, and for 4 years she's been the primary caregiver for 3 younger children. She gets them up, feeds them, gets them to school, makes dinner, does homework with them, puts them to bed, cleans the house. Everything a parent does, she does, at 11 years old. Because her mother is working 3 jobs trying to keep them alive. And this baby's wish isn't for anything for herself. It's for her mom to not have to kill herself working. That's what poverty does. It steals childhood. It turns children into adults before they're ready. It forces mothers to choose between being present and keeping their children fed and housed. He looked at Sophie, his voice gentle despite the tears. Sophie, sweetheart, you shouldn't have to wish for your mom to be home. That should just be your reality. You should be playing with friends, doing kid things, worrying about kid problems. You shouldn't be raising 3 children. That's not fair to you. Sophie's face showed she was confused by everyone's reaction. But somebody has to take care of Miguel and Isabella and Carlos. If I don't do it, who will? My mom has to work, so I have to help. It's not bad. I don't mind it. But Steve shook his head. Baby, you're not supposed to mind it or not mind it. You're not supposed to have to do it at all. You're supposed to be a child. The audience was sobbing. The crew was crying, and Rosa was holding Sophie, both of them crying now, Rosa apologizing over and over. I'm sorry, Misha. I'm so sorry. I know you do too much. I know I ask too much of you. I don't have a choice. I'm so sorry. And Sophie, 11 years old and already more mature than most adults, comforted her mother. Mama, it's okay. I know you work hard for us. I know you love us. It's not your fault. Steve Harvey announced right there, before even revealing the points, that he didn't care what the board showed. The Martinez family was getting 20,000, and then he made calls, had conversations with producers, and within an hour they'd arranged something unprecedented. Family Feud would cover 6 months of Rosa's rent, would connect the family with social services and assistance programs, would work with local organizations to get the children into after-school programs so Sophie didn't have to do all the caretaking, would help Rosa cut down from 3 jobs to 1 full-time job so she could actually be home with her children. By the time they left the studio that day, the Martinez family's life had fundamentally changed. Not because of the 20,000, though that helped, but because Sophie's accidental revelation of her wish had exposed the impossible situation this family was in and mobilized resources to actually help. Rosa cut down to 1 full-time job that paid better with benefits. Sophie was enrolled in after-school activities and counseling to help process the trauma of having parented her siblings for 4 years. Miguel and Isabella got into programs that gave them care and activities. The family started having dinner together. Rosa was present, could help with homework, could put her own children to bed, could be their mother instead of being an exhausted ghost. The episode aired 6 weeks later, in October 2024, and Sophie's answer about her wish went massively viral, viewed over 700 million times. People around the world were devastated by this child's selfless wish, by the reality of working poverty that forces children into adult roles, by a system that requires a mother to work 3 jobs and still barely survive. The clip sparked conversations about minimum wage, about affordable housing, about childcare, about how we as a society allow families to struggle like this while calling it their personal failure rather than a system failure. Hundreds of thousands of people reached out wanting to help the Martinez family specifically, and a GoFundMe raised over 400,000, enough to give Rosa a financial cushion, to pay for the children's education, to give this family breathing room for the first time ever. Sophie, who'd been forced to grow up too fast, slowly started getting to be a child again, making friends, joining clubs, doing homework that was hers not her siblings, having time to just be 11 years old. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that childhood poverty isn't a personal failure but a systemic one, that children forced into adult roles deserve recognition and help, and that no 11-year-old should have to wish for their mother to simply be present, hit that like button and share this video. Subscribe to our channel because we share stories about people carrying invisible burdens, about families surviving impossible circumstances, about children who deserve better than the hands they've been dealt. Sophie Martinez was 11 years old when she stood on a Family Feud stage and revealed through her wish that she'd been parenting her 3 younger siblings for 4 years while her mother worked 3 jobs just to keep them alive. When Steve Harvey's voice broke hearing this child's wish, not for toys or money or anything for herself, but for her mother to not have to work so hard, to be home, to be present, we all learned that some wishes break your heart because they reveal how much has already been broken, how much has been asked of someone too small to carry it, how much children sacrifice when poverty steals their childhood and replaces it with responsibility they never asked for. That's why Steve couldn't finish the question, why his voice broke, why this child's simple wish became a mirror, showing us exactly what's wrong with a system that forces mothers to choose between being present and keeping their children fed.